just a quick little blurb about us. We're now hosting in-person and virtual events, all partnered events and supported events, and classes and programs and trips. So for a full list, just go to our website, politics-prose.com. As always, before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items to go through. So for one, I'd like to ask everybody to take out their cell phones and silence them so that we don't disrupt the program today. At the end of the program, we'll go to a time for open floor for your questions. We have a standing mic right behind this white pillar here. For some of you, it might be hidden. But we have a mic right there, so we just asked you to come to it to speak loud and clear so we can hear your question for our audio recording. Along with that, we're audio recording, video recording, and live streaming our event today. So you can go back and you can watch the program. And then following the Q&A, we'll have a signing line at this table right next to me. The signing line will start at that white pillar. And if you haven't had a chance to buy a copy of the book yet, it's behind the register. And then once the event is complete, we'll ask that you fold up your chairs if you're able to and just prop them up against something sturdy. Me and the other event staffers would be very grateful. So without further ado, tonight I'm very excited to welcome Christopher Paul Harris, celebrating the release of his novel, To Build a Black Future, The Radical Politics of Joy, Pain, and Care. Christopher Paul Harris is Assistant Professor of Global and International Studies at the University of California, Irvine. His work aims to understand the political lives, thoughts, and cultures of the Black diaspora and the underlying forces that shape them. Harris earned his PhD in Politics and Historical Studies from the New School for Social Research. He was a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of African American Studies at Northwestern University. To Build a Black Future is his first book. Harris will be joined in conversation tonight by Marcus Bohr Jr., an associate professor of political science at Howard University. Dr. Bohr's research engages race, gender, and social movements through the study of ideology and public opinion. His first book is Invisible Weapons, Infiltrating Resistance and Defeating Movements, which discusses the movement for Black lives, a towering presence complicated by anti-radical grassroots politics. Bohr uses his Invisible Weapons framework and mixed methods analysis to explain how marginalized groups are silenced, disempowered, and politically co-opted, and how we might redirect in our fights to overcome. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Christopher Paul Harris and Marcus Bohr.
All right, good to see everybody. How's everybody doing? Okay, we need better energy. So how's everybody doing? Great. Wonderful. Good to be here. Okay, well, yeah. That's important. Yeah, so just for the cameras, yeah, the buffet of shrimp, lobster is all afterwards, filet mignon. I wanted to open up, before we do, our greetings and introductions, I wanted to open up with a quote from the book to kind of set the stage, if you don't mind. So it says, it's from the chapter A Joyful Rebellion in, of course, Dr. Harris's To Build a Black Future, The Radical Politics of Joy, Pain, and Care. He says, He says, in its essence, Black joy is a refusal to be overwhelmed by pain or consumed by the rage anti-Blackness forces upon us. It is the recognition that while we can and should be angry about a political and social structure intent to do us harm, it need not define who we are or how we move through the world. Joy is a signal to others and oneself that we are nevertheless here, that we can be here and thrive as we move towards a Black future. In that sense, Black joy expresses and prefigures a future freedom where all Black people can be joyous wherever we are and however we want. Black joy, in other words, is a means to recognize what Christina Sharp describes as the largeness that is Black life. Black life insisted from death. That is why, from the vantage of the way, the rebellion will be and is joyful, close quote. So welcome to Dr. Christopher Paul Harris. Please give him a round of applause for being here. Dr. Harris.
Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here.
All right. So Dr. Harris, so as you heard, my name is Marcus Board, author of Invisible Weapons, associate professor of political science at Howard University. And this is Dr. Christopher Paul Harris from UC Irvine in the Department of Global and International Studies. So we want to thank our hosts, Politics and Prose and the Princeton University Press, for putting this event together, and thank you all for being here and joining us. So itinerary, kind of what we plan to get into. Dr. Harris will talk about his work, his inspirations, tell us his takeaways. I'll kind of guide that conversation for a few minutes, and then we'll shoot to you and the audience for a Q&A. So if that sounds good, all the housekeeping is in place. Dr. Harris, anything you want to share before we get going?
No, let's do it.
Okay, so it's important to get to know people, right? Who are your people? Get to know where people are coming from. So I know you're in California now. It's a long trip. How you feeling? How's everything going? How was the trip?
It's been a lot of movement for the last couple of days.
Yeah?
But it feels good. People are in the audience that I haven't seen in a long time, and that makes me feel energized rather than fatigued from having not slept. So I'm feeling particularly well.
Oh. Well, shout out to your sleep and self-care, but welcome to the people who are here. That's great. Okay. And have you been to D.C. before, or is this your first time? How we doing?
I've been here plenty of times, yeah.
Okay. That's a big talk show energy.
But it's been a while.
Okay. And so for those who don't know you here, tell us about yourself. Tell us where you're from or what you're about and how you came to be here with us today.
Right. Where to begin with that? So as you know, or have been told, I am an assistant professor in the Department of Global Studies, Global and International Studies at UC Irvine. I got to Irvine by way of Chicago during the pandemic years, which is weird, but still nurturing in some important ways. And then kind of came to myself in New York. Perhaps the best thing or the most important thing that I could say that is relevant to the book, other than the fact that I spent a couple of years, the book's based on my time organizing with the Black Youth Project 100 in New York City, is that prior to going to academia, I was a musician. So one of the last times that I've been to DC was for that reason, to play shows. And when that inevitably failed, I decided that I decided that the only possible career path for me would be something that would involve writing and reading. And so I just said, well, why don't I go ahead and be an academic? Which was crazy to think, right? Music, academic, they're not really related, but it worked out.
Okay. Despite your best efforts, we are still inspired by your work and for your story. So that's really great. And I would love to talk more about that later. So getting to the book, I always want to start with your inspirations, right? So usually when I read books, although in your book it was at the end, I went to the acknowledgment section. So is there anyone or any group or any folks anywhere you want to take this moment to acknowledge as we get going? Just folks that you were inspired by or folks who made this labor of love that much easier for you?
Right. Well, I can say it was never easy at any point during the process, whether it was the dissertation. This book was my dissertation, or in book form. But since the movement is about movement and is many ways emergent from movement, I would be remiss if I didn't first lift up those who have been and continue to be organizing on the ground to build a Black future. And in fact, the title of the book, I don't say this anywhere in the book, but the title of the book actually comes from movement. When I joined BYP 100 in 2016, they were just about, or may have already released their first national policy platform, and that policy platform was called the Agenda to Build Black Futures. And the idea of a Black future or Black futures has, I think, also been pretty evident and circulating in public culture. So I'm sure if you walked around this bookstore, you would probably find an edited volume by Kimberly Drew and Jenna Wortham called Black Futures. So just to say that that theme is something that circulates and is part of what the book was trying to do, which is talk about this moment and say something about this moment. And so, but before just going and being tangential about this, the main person or things that I want to thank would be movement.
Beautiful. So I guess then, kind of getting into the text, I guess the big question is right there in the title. For you, what is a Black future? What does it mean for you? And what are you trying to convey through this book?
Yes, another great question. So, to be clear, this is not a novel. It was, kind of based off of ethnographic research that I did in a somewhat experimental way. And so half of what I think it means to build a Black future is my interpretation of the people I was organizing with and the other paths that I walked in trying to narrate who and what the movement is. And then the other half is just a little bit of me, because there's always not an imposition, but some of yourself that you give to any interpretation, which allows it to be an interpretation. But to get to the question, I think that the answer is kind of open-ended, right? And I wanted the book itself, the title of the book, the way it looks, to invoke that. So on the one hand, the book is about an assertion that we should build a Black future, and that would mean a future free of anti-Black structures, and that would mean a future that didn't and wasn't governed by capitalist social relations and capitalism as such, right? And so we can get into all the things that would also entail, but just broadly, it's an assertion that we need to and be about building a Black future, and that's not some kind of utopic, imaginary thing. It's a thing that we can begin practicing right now. Learning some of the lessons that I try to draw out in the book and applying those lessons to how we live our lives. So that's the assertion, but the open-endedness is that we don't have to know, right? And actually, maybe it's better that we don't impose on the future what the future will will for itself. It's about the people that we become in the process of building that Black future that should define what a Black future will look like when that future comes. So, to me, to build a Black future is to assert the need to do so, and to allow oneself to be transformed in the process towards that thing that we can't yet name.
That's wonderful. And so I guess on that same line, asking folks to assert themselves, to be transformed by these politics. You speak about, in the book, you speak about joining the BYP 100 and that process for you. You speak about it early in the intro chapter. So we know that people aren't always open to transformation, to asserting this potential future, putting themselves in the position. So maybe you can either speak for yourself or how you might imagine others, but what does it look like for folks to then put themselves in position to be a part of this flow that you're describing?
Yeah, great question. Personally, I came to my understanding of my own Blackness through my experience in this movement. It's not that I didn't understand that I was Black, obviously, or what the Black experience was, but I was transformed. Not just in terms of my relationship to my own Blackness. We've gone through the university spaces. Because of structural inequalities, university spaces are privileged spaces, and these privileged spaces tend to look a certain way, right? And people that look like us are not absent, but a minority to say the least. And so moving through that, at first I was kind of hewing to a community that looked like that. Not hewing in terms of changing myself, but who I was seeking out, right? The people that were around me. And how I framed my political vision, which was at the time a naive belief in the capacity of the state as structured. The state as structured could actually lift up everyone. the state as structured could lift
See how
up
the man tries to stop us? You see? Stay woke, y'all.
could 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 lift up everyone equally. So I believe that there was something that could be redeemed about this, where what we've inherited. In BYP 100, not intending to write about Black movement alone, I intended to write about generational politics more broadly. I'm a millennial. I think you're a millennial.
Allegedly.
I was I was interested in how we were thinking differently about the political, broadly understood. But once I entered the movement space, it was like, whoa, what is this? This is where I need to be. And that's when I shifted gears towards the project and slowly transformed myself from researcher to organizer. Not that I claim that I'm an organizer now. I am a scholar. That's what I'm doing. People struggle on the ground doing that hard work, and we talk about what they're doing, and I want to acknowledge that difference. But a part of this was being in the trenches for a couple of years. And so I kind of shed the researcher in a lot of ways, which was a process that opened me up to my own toxic masculinity, how it's showing up in space, the way I would wear my middle class educated privilege, right, unknowingly. And so, Mary Hooks, who's a Black Southern organizer, says in a mandate that really touched me when I first heard it, the mandate for Black people in this time is to avenge the suffering of our ancestors, earn the respect of future generations, and be willing to be transformed in the process of the work. I'm getting that end part wrong, but the willing to be transformed part was the part that really stuck with me. So to answer the question, that was a long-winded way to get here, but to answer the question, it's that openness and that willingness that we all need to adopt in some way. And part of that is shedding the parts of ourselves, recognizing, trying to shed, and holding ourselves accountable to and for the attempts to shed the part of ourselves that inevitably looks, feels, and gestures towards, a violent, heteronormative, patriarchal, anti-Black society.
You can take all the time you want on these answers because they're so rich. You leave no meat on the bone. So one of the things that you said, among the things that you said, is believing that change was possible. But then you described this process of disciplining, I guess, yourself, of shedding, as you described, the parts of yourself that you had clung so harshly to in the past. So I want to push you even more to say what that process was like, what that experience was like. So the case in point, for example, for those cases, people are very particular about how one.
I was always one to want to give input. I went into leadership for that reason, and at a certain point, I was called in by people around me about the space that I was taking up, and that's a valuable lesson. The space that I was taking up in an all-Black space as a Black cis heterosexual man, right? And so that's the sort of space that, like, say, the white folks in this room who are our friends and our community, to recognize when they're taking up space that might otherwise be a platform for someone else to speak. And so it's to get to the crux of the question, it's a hard, messy process. It was hard and messy for me personally because I had adopted this organizer hat. But I was playing the organizer and the researcher at the same time. I was figuring out how to write about it, right? I was figuring out how to articulate what it was I was experiencing while trying to live up to the mandate, right? And BYP 100 is really suggestive of the larger movement in that it operates through a Black queer feminist lens, which at the forefront is a desire to center the historically marginalized in the work that we do. And I had never been in such a space before. So figuring out how to navigate that and hold both hats at the same time was difficult but it wasn't just difficult for me. I mean, I could talk about myself all day, but like, if any of you have ever been in anything like movement spaces, there's messy, and then there's messy, and movement space, surpasses that other. And and the reason why it does that, the reason why that happens is because people care so much, right? Because they're there for a reason. And so when there's disappointment, when someone oversteps, when someone like kind of undermines the values of the organization, or when there's interpersonal violence, or where, it hurts worse for folks. Not just because it's supposed to be a place where, young black folks could feel safe in the, capacious expanse of what blackness is or could be. But in particular, it's also a space where we're supposed to be striving for and holding ourselves accountable. And so when that falls short, it's tough. So all of that to say is it was difficult and continues to be difficult for me to live up to the values that I understood and that I try to map in the book, that I feel like provides a blueprint for everyone, not just black folks, but it centers black folks. But movement in and of itself is hard, and it's a struggle. And we all fail, and failure doesn't have to be an end and a conclusion, but can be an opportunity to shed some more things towards repair. Actually, I think that's the title of a Miriam Kaba book that you guys should check out, Failing Towards, or something falling towards repair. But the idea that like when you fail or when you fall short, and you will inevitably do so in whatever realm we're speaking about, it's an opportunity to be better for yourself and others.
Yeah, when you were describing it, I heard the idea, like people talk about being church hurt, and like there's movement hurt. And it's a very particular, challenging time and space. But I also hear you articulating an idea about restorative justice, if I may, about running into these failures and then pushing through towards accountability and furthering the community that you're building. So it's beautiful. Okay, so let's maybe get a little bit more specifically into the book, because my overarching question is the idea of why should we build a black future? You told us how, you've told us what it is and how and your vision, but in this idea of why, I'm thinking of it in your chapter on joy, page 145, you say, quote, "Joy is a way to practice making loving blackness possible," as Bell Hooks puts it. So can you talk to us about the practices that make loving blackness possible? What makes it so that we have to be told to love blackness? Like, how do we get to this space?
Yeah. And it's a great question, and I'm going to characteristically answer it in a convoluted and tangential way.
I'm going to stop you. Too much self-deprecation. We are very happy that you're here. You got a great round of applause. Twice.
I'm being self-aware.
Okay.
I'm holding myself accountable.
Okay.
And letting you know what's about to come.
Well, show us the black joy.
There we go.
You know?
So to the initial crux of the question, why, right? The reason has been consistent. The world that we live in came to be, was co-constitutive of and with anti-blackness on the one hand and capitalism on the other. And so since slavery and the coloniality that brought the world that we live in into being, black people have always been trying to build a future, right? The question is how? So the why, right, is because of the violence that we have experienced over the last 10 years with the hypervisibility of Black death made possible by social media, right? It's just there. It's not new, but we experience it differently. And the experience of it with each generation yields a different answer to the question of the what and the how. And so what I think is so vibrant about this particular iteration of Black struggle is the fact that joy represents and is in a direct dialectical relationship with pain, right? It's a response to pain. It's not just to deal with pain, although, that's part of it. It's also, an opportunity to prefigure what the world might look like if that pain did not exist, right? It's evidence that such a world is possible because we are possible to have joy despite the fact that the world exists as it does. And so, you know, the kind of why we want to build a black future is because of the constant, never-ending string of violent black deaths as the most extreme case of a world that would that has otherwise made life more difficult for most black and other people of color, right? Even though, you know, we've got fancy jobs or titles and like are putting out books by fancy presses or whatever, but that's not indicative of, or when we had a black president and Beyonce exists. And, you know, we can go on and on about all these things that are great about black people doing things in the world that would make you think that everything is fine. But that just masks the continuity of this structural foundational problem, and that has always been the why, and the how in this context is a direct response to the hypervisibility of Black death. Again, not that Black death was unique, but we have been forced to witness it in a very particular way, which makes joy one of those strategies, along with healing and restorative justice that you mentioned before, to kind of attempt to move ourselves someplace else.
When you one of the examples I think follows along with what you're saying, I'm thinking about when another person with fancy titles and fancy presses, Henry Louis Gates, I think 2009 maybe, gets arrested for breaking into his own house. And the Obama presidency starts with a lot of hope, a lot of potential, a lot of joy, a lot of people thinking, this is our moment, this is it. And he responds with that same energy, and he says, what the officer did was stupid. And he caught hell for it. And I don't think we see him go back to that level of what we might call common sense, racial common sense. I don't think we see him go back to that. And so with that idea in mind, and as we're talking about practicing making loving Blackness possible, what makes it, why is loving Blackness not inevitable? I know you said anti-Blackness and capitalism, co-constitutive of the world that we live in today, hard agree. But you also said, nevertheless, our joy persists. And so I'm wondering, why is it not an inevitable thing that people will love Blackness? And knowing that it's not, but why isn't it?
Right, well, I mean, the best way that I can think of right now to answer that is to pose a question, not for you to answer, but just to exist as a question that one thinks about as a potential answer. If the world is structured and constantly tells you you're a slave, or you live here and you can't go there, or whatever other thing that we can name that has, you know, marshaled in many ways Black people's experience of the world, how or why would many Black people not have a particular view of themselves? But even if they wanted to have a celebratory view of Blackness or Black people, there's still ways that falls short too. And that's in the realm of Black respectability politics. So that's the position that, hey, I love Black people are great, we're beautiful, but you know, you got to hold yourself to a particular standard. You got to look a certain way. You can't have the tattoos. You can't have the, I'm not sagging, you know, like the things that you know what I'm talking about, like, and y'all know too, right? Like the things that we heard a lot more of growing up than we hear now. And I think that we hear it less, especially amongst our generation. I mean, our parents and grandparents are our parents and grandparents, but you know, speaks to this desire to make loving Blackness possible, which is to allow Blackness and Black people to just be as capaciously as we want to be, and that the fact that we try to, you know, quarantine or you know, box in who we are to fit into a society that is structurally violent towards us is a contradiction, right? You know, it doesn't make sense. And so I think it's the recognition of that, combined with a deep-seated love for black people and a desire to build a black future, that you begin to make loving blackness possible by letting blackness be whatever it is.
So then, as I take it, the idea of building a black future is not just a directive or a inclination that you would like for black people, it's for all people. So would it be fair to say that loving blackness is not inevitable even among black people? And if that campaign, that anti-blackness campaign that the world puts on is so effective even among black people, then of course it will be effective among others. Would that be a fair way to describe it?
Yep. But I think the point that you make is an important one about this not just being for or about black people, right? And when we're talking about the world, and that's a big idea, right? But let's, we're in DC. Let's make it smaller and just talk about this country, right? And the things that we're seeing in this country that don't have anything to do with black people directly, but that nevertheless impinge on everybody's will to live as they want. Which is a roundabout way of saying that just the way our country, this country functions, is violent to all people, not just black people. And so blackness is an analytic in that sense, right? Like loving blackness is loving and desiring something outside of the violence that everybody experiences and sometimes doesn't notice in their everyday lives. I mean, think about all the things that are going on across the country with regards to trans and gender non-conforming legislation. That doesn't have anything to do with black people directly. It affects black people, of course, right? But that's not directly. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean that we have legislators, predominantly white, older legislators, defining for us, collectively, the us, and that includes you all too, defining for us how we should carry ourselves when we're 10 or 11. That we're not allowed to express ourselves the way we want to, which causes all kinds of psychological damage. And we know this because this has been the practice for many years, right? This is what they're responding to, right? That movement folks and people around movement, black or non-black alike, are like, nah, people can be whoever they want to be. We don't give a fuck. It's like, just like, be who you are. And that's the sort of world that we want to build. And that's a world that's an invitation for everyone. And blackness is a point of reference to recognize how we might begin to get there in a way that's going to make all the things that bear down on all people visible and in a place where we want to have something else.
Making it visible in a way that gives us the opportunity to both embrace blackness as a way to counteract the fundamental organizing structure of this world and as a means to be free ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sure.
Well said.
Listen, I'm just here.
You saw me struggle trying to find there was a word. You said there was a word I was looking for, and then you were like, I got you. And
I'm on your team.
Yeah.
Love your shoes. Since we're here.
What, your pants? I wasn't gonna say anything about the shirt. I mean, like.
I love gummy bears. So
is that what that is?
I hope so.
Oh.
For the camera, it is.
I wasn't exactly sure, but
and just in this quick moment, shout out to Lily and Nicole. Thank you both for being so great to us. You all were great. So a few more questions, and then we're gonna turn it over to the audience. So be ready with your questions. Let's see. Let me skip a few. All right. So let's get into a little bit of the hard part, and then we'll finish off with the asking about your dreams. So prepare yourself to talk about your dreams. But before that, asking about two things. There's black pain and political conflict. So in chapter 3, the chapter on black pain, you say, quote, "The fire that moves this movement and has fueled black rebellion is, in the first instance, harnessed through the burn of black pain." So talk to us about the strengths and the limitations of rebellions that are grounded in Black pain, right? I can imagine, oh, well, I'll leave that right there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that ties back to some of the things that we were talking about, but it's a perfect invitation to expound on that. One of the things that I think is vivid about the movement, this particular movement moment's response to Black pain, is the depth of the analysis, right? It's not, we just want to vote, or we just want opportunity, or we just want these things. It's a recognition that we need to build something else. If you get stuck in the pain, though, then your ability to imagine what that other thing might be is demarcated from the start. Because all you want to do is destroy, burn down, and we should do those things, but with a vision in mind, you know, the open-endedness I was talking about before. So one of the things that pain and rage and anger, well, rage and anger derived from pain, as important moments need to be moments that allow us to harness what that pain calls on us to do. And that's come with an analysis that opens up the opportunity to begin to build something else.
Perfectly said. So, and then to this question of political conflict, you go on to say, longer quote, to speak of the dramatic in this instance is to embrace the need for confrontational tactics, to urgently intervene in and over public space in ways that disrupt, tear down, and seek to replace entrenched narratives like the ones attached to Confederate iconography, regardless of what the law might mandate. So in that sense, right, because there's a lot of conflicting opinions right now. I was a part of a political science wrote a report on parties, and their idea is that polarization is so bad, we got to get away from this kind of disrespectful context, in which the chapter I wrote, I was like, I kind of call BS. But for you...
Political Science, the journal?
No, this is the American Political Science Association in working with a group called Protect Democracy.
I see.
And they talked about mutual toleration.
I see.
And I forget the way they phrased it, but the respecting, not using power to your full extent.
Right, I got it.
Their thinking being generally that the reason why we have some of the newer degree, arguably, in threatening democracy today is because people are embracing these confrontational politics. But you, in this quote, are saying exactly that. So can you tell us about those confrontational tactics aligning with that sense of urgency that you describe in the quote? And particularly, we know that civil rights history, for example, has been bastardized in a bit to seem as though their urgency and confrontation was actually some impossible sense of patience and politely accepting what the law mandates. So can you tell us your case for confrontation, for politics that embrace confrontation as a means of pushing into these challenging spaces of rage and through to a place where we create better visions?
Yeah, there are a couple of things I want to say to that. That's a good question. And perhaps I'd frame it this way. What does a march do? If you attend a march, what does it do? Well, nothing tangibly, but like on a psychological level, it could do quite a bit. And so there is one element of, say, toppling statues that is both a direct assault on a structure that you believe should not exist. And in the Durham example that I give in the book, which was well before 2020, when we saw all these monuments fall, the activist that did it as an act of the people's will. She framed it as an act of the people's will. This is our home, and we don't want this here, right? We don't want this here. So it was a performance in the sense that it doesn't do anything tangible about the life worlds of people except for remove the statue. But with that performance, it created the sense that we can do that. Actually, we should do that. It is our right to do that. We are the people, the politicians work for us, and they're not doing their job. So there's that's the one element, like recognizing how important it is to demonstrate vividly, sometimes violently, what is necessary, so other people can recognize that necessity. Now, the other part of it, though, is a more difficult recognition that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and that is the fact of violence as such, by which I mean state force versus what the people who would have a different world have to wield. And so confrontation, I was going to say something about the political science thing, but then I realized that I just have such disdain and disinterest in the discipline that it wasn't worth saying. So who cares what they have to say? But like the point being that if we're going to build a black future, if we're going to build a future where everyone can live as they please, we can expect those who wield power now not to take too kind to that. And we've seen violent police reaction, so we should expect that. And that's going to inevitably mean that we are going to have the capacity, the will, and the training to be able to combat that in some way, strategically, tactically. But we shouldn't be naive about what that is. And so, just to sum up those points, the way that performative acts of destruction both call back to an insurrectionary tradition that began with slavery, slave insurrections, and demonstrates to people that we have will and can do what we want for ourselves as the community. And then it also gestures towards that larger thing, that more difficult thing, is that if we're going to go where we want to go, inevitably we're going to have to confront the armed forces of the state, and that's going to mean violence perpetrated in both ways, and we just need to be clear that that's what will happen, and be willing to, take on that revolutionary ethos when the time and conditions are right.
Drawing out the enemy with some intentionality, right? Knowing that they're coming and saying, hey, look, this is what we're facing, even if they hang out, they hide away for a while, but this is what happens when they come out, and they shouldn't be able to do this. In fact, they should be doing better.
This is the reality of the situation.
All right, I'm on my last question, and then we're Q&A, so gear up. And the last thing I want to ask you is about your vision, right? I told you I was going to ask you about your dreams, so this is that moment. We're here. And of course, anything you want to say in kind of conclusion. But it's about abolition. You say in the beginning, on page 12, you say abolition is the pursuit of another world altogether. And so I want you to take a moment and tell us what you see in that vision, right? This isn't, and I want to be clear, this isn't like when skeptics kind of are like, well, what are you going to do, right? It's not that thing. But kind of dreaming and imagining what's possible. It's kind of in the spirit of like Mahalia Jackson asking Martin to tell him the dream, right? Like, what is the dream? What is the vision of that future for you, even if it's just in part? What would that look like?
Yeah, for me and dreams. Do I have dreams? I'm not sure. I think that no. I mean, I want to explain what I meant by that as a way of answering the question. The process of writing the book was painful in a lot of ways, and not just painful in terms of the subject matter, not just painful in terms of the experience, the personal experiences that I had. Not just painful because of the reality of the thing that makes writing this book, doing organizing, all of that is it, but also difficult in what it means. What are we doing, right? The book was difficult and painful for me because I wanted to get it right. I wanted to get it right, not just by doing justice to movement and movement making, but by also making clear that the book itself is a representation of movement. It's not just a book about movement, it's a book of movement. And that's a weighty responsibility. Because you're not just trying to, I wasn't just trying to write a book to get tenure. I'm going to get tenure. But I wasn't just writing a book for that reason, you know? I was trying to do something. And so I think that's deeply connected to what my dreams are. I don't necessarily have a vision of society because I think that's the thing that we're going to make ourselves. What I dream for or hope for is the conditions by which we do that. And so while we're here in this space, not this literal space, but like, you know, in the space under the conditions that we're in, what can I do? And so I aspire to write work, to do work that is affective and effective, that hopefully in some ways makes you feel something, and that makes effective the argumentation as it's presented in the book, insofar as you at least begin to consider for yourself what a Black future might be and what you might do to help bring it about.
Dr. Christopher Paul Harris, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. All right, we have an opportunity to do questions. Should we pass the mic, Nicole? Or? The microphone is hiding behind the oppressive white pillar. Just kidding.
What do you think about those who usurp the movement? For example, those who create false flags in furtherance of a larger agenda, and also like a situation with President Clinton, where people had claimed that he was the first Black president, when there were laws that he passed like 3 strikes and you're out.
Mm. Yeah, great question. And there's a couple of different layers to that question. And the way that I want to respond to it is this: it's important that we think about movement beyond people and institutions, organizations, because they fail. There are usurpers. There are, you know, there are all kinds of, you know, ways that movement gets derailed. And if you paid any kind of attention to Black Lives Matter organizations, organizationally, you will know exactly how fraught those things are. We talk about messy. I mean, you write about this, right? You know, so that's why when I think about movement and when I name movement, what I'm talking about is the constellation of organizations and activists, those who might fail us, those who might be a usurper, those who might do right by us. But I'm also talking about the culture, the political culture that exceeds those people. And to me, that's the valuable thing in this moment. What I think, and when I think and talk about movement, I think and talk about the political culture that exists and emanates from those organizations that may fail and get usurped, but exists beyond them. And so when the Black Lives Matter moment is over, and maybe it is right now, who knows, who's to say, when that moment comes, it's what remains that matter. And I think the political culture is something that will remain and that we can help move us towards a new era of struggle when and whenever we get there. I hope that addresses the question sufficiently.
Does your book address reparations, not only based on race, but perhaps also, to a lesser extent, perhaps based on gender or sexual preference?
No, because I'm personally not interested in reparations, because reparations suggests that structurally there's something that we can do to redeem the system that we live under. Reparations suggests, whether it's monetarily or otherwise, you know, they had in Evanston, Illinois, for example, they had the kind of like helping people buy their home or something like that. This is talk about false flags, right? This is a way of allowing us to think that there's something that can be repaired, and that we can repair it monetarily. I mean, if we're going to talk about reparations, then we should do it. I forget how to pronounce his last name. He's got a book that came out recently. Chris Monger. I'm sorry, I apologize about it, but I think The Black Ghosts of Empire, I believe is what it's called. And when he talks about reparations, he talks about reparations in a much more expansive way that would require a total social transformation. And so, no, the book doesn't talk about reparations, because from my vantage, what's important about movement culture is abolition, and abolition means undoing the world and remaking it. So if there's a reparation, it's the destruction of what we have now and the creative gestures towards what might come after it.
Thank you for those questions. It's Chris Manjaparo.
Yeah, there you go.
Shout out to Google.
Yeah.
Hope I'm pronouncing it right.
I don't know.
You mentioned two worlds, the activist world and the academic world, and how difficult it is to straddle both of them. If magically we could have economic empowerment, do you think that would somehow help to bring the two worlds together? Because outside of the US, in other countries, especially in the developing and the emerging world, that's often the belief that it is the economic divide that is kind of exacerbating the other divides, the social divide, the cultural divide, and so on and so forth. So do you believe in this context, the economic empowerment would kind of help to mitigate some of the differences and bring the two activist and the academic world together more?
Well, one thing I'd want to, before addressing or trying to address the question, as this is a dialogue, I would love to hear more about what, for you or for others that you talk to about this in the developing world or wherever that might be, economic empowerment means and would look like. Because it's only through an understanding of what that is that we could begin to say whether that will do anything. It's too often, and you're not doing this, of course, but it's too often that people in power use phrases that are attached to rhetoric that makes us feel like it's a thing that helps. And development has been that type of thing in a lot of ways, right? So that's why it depends on what we mean, because it could or it could not, depending on what it is.
I can give you in the context of India, for example.
Yeah.
If you talk about the caste divide, which is like a race divide. I mean, we're all of the same races, and yet there are so many layers of the caste divide. And very often it is that joblessness is very high in the lower castes. Joblessness is high among women. Participation in India has gone lower in the last decade, for example. So if you talk about all these marginalized groups, whether it's the caste group or the gender group, when they are supported, and I work with that, so when they are supported with creating jobs, creating small businesses, making them self-reliant and reliable, then their ability to have more of a voice, because they don't just cast a vote, they have an economic voice. They're able to talk about taxes. They're talking about, whether they should or shouldn't be taxed, or how should the economic environment be treating them. So they get to have a voice. So economic empowerment quite often helps to bridge that gap. So I know it in a different context. I don't know the context here.
Well, I mean, I think I was asking you about whatever context you wanted to offer with the offering that you gave us, and thank you so much for clarifying or filling in the details. There's a saying, and it's not universally supported in contemporary movement, that we can have non-reformist reforms that lift up the historically marginalized, so in that would be a version of economic empowerment, so they can live as best they can as things are. but it's a non-reformist reform insofar as it doesn't re-entrench the system as it is, right? So one might think some of those programs that you were describing that lift people up and allow them to be full participants in the capitalist world system would simply just re-entrench the capitalist world system rather than create opportunities to undo it, which isn't to say anything against economic empowerment. We have to do both things, right? But I guess what I'm trying to say is, to answer the question, economic empowerment, however rendered, if it lifts people up in terms of their material conditions so they can live and thrive as best they can while we continue to be under siege, I support that. But if that's an end in and of itself, our analysis is off. So we don't just want people to be able to participate and vote. We want them to do that, but we want people to want something else. Because no matter what we do, no matter who gets to cast a vote in our democracy, right? It still leaves the fundamental structures of inequality, racialized, gendered, sexualized violence intact. And so we need new institutions, we need new ways of doing things, and economic empowerment alone isn't going to get us there.
That's an excellent perspective. Thank you.
I think we're out of time. Got time for one more question.
I would like to follow on that theme that you set up, because I was born in Shanghai, and in my day, there were Chinese babies being left on the doors of foreigners' houses because China was in such a bad state, right? There was such a lack of equality, and there was no government that was doing anything about it. And what strikes me here is we have a very wealthy country, and the secret now, there was tremendous racial discrimination, which we need to move ahead from. And the problem now, to my mind, is an economic one, in that it takes a very good education nowadays in this country, right? And I tutored in a public school. I think that there's great room for improvement in the educational system here. I don't think we're educating people sufficiently to take advantage of the situation, because this is a very wealthy country, and there's just no excuse for the fact that we don't have more people going on to jobs that pay adequately. And I just think the secret is in education. And the Chinese, by drastic measures, have turned around their situation largely through that fact.
Thank you. Some more comment than a question, but a perfect ending, I think.
Well, no, I mean, I do want to. There's something. There's something I love about the China example, especially if we're talking about. And I won't dwell on this because I know this isn't our subject. Especially if we're talking about, the Marxist vision of Mao in the transformation, now as violent as that turned out. I think that pivot allows us to say that, yes, education, as you say, education, that is not, though, the central problem. Education is a symptom of the central problem, which is capitalism. And all of the racial hierarchical vestiges that capitalism has produced. And so if we were not living in a world defined by capitalist social relations, everything that you're talking about wouldn't be a question. Everybody would have equal access to education, and it would be affordable if it costs anything. And there would be a different way of thinking about work, a different way of thinking about employment, and none of those things would be a concern, because the social, not the individual, would be our directive. The social, not any one person rising up, would be how we structured our society. Now, how we would do that, would it look like China today? I hope not. Would it look like, Soviet Russia after the, no, I don't think we know. And this is why I said, and this is how a good way, I think, to end, this is what I meant by the open-endedness. What we're striving for is not something that we've already seen. And so we can't know how to talk about it if we haven't seen it. It doesn't mean that we reject everything that we've already encountered that we know could work or might work and experiment with, but to simply say that something that we've tried and failed at is going to be the structure by which we build a black future is delusional. That's the word, is delusional. What we have to do, not that you're delusional, I'm just, I'm talking about. That is a longer conversation. I think the point was about education, and I think that that is about a structural problem that can be solved in a system that looks nothing like what we've ever had, including China, and would allow us all to be whatever it is we want it to be.
We are out of time, but would you all join me in thanking Dr. Harris, who will be here signing books? Please buy his wonderful book. He will be here signing a few, and we can talk to him afterwards. I know there are a few questions left over, but